elbows into your sides if you're shooting with a DSLR or anything you're bringing to your face. But if you stabilize that by sticking your elbows in, holding that tight, you'll still move around. Warp stabilizer, no motion. Now it looks like you carted a big old tripod all day. The last thing I want to show you with warp stabilizer is if you've added a clip to a sequence that doesn't match the pixels. Warp stabilizer needs to have the exact same pixels and frames and everything. So watch this. This one, there's a lot of motion. I'm walking around, boom, 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 boom. If I apply this, I'll get a warning. Warp stabilizer requires clip pixel aspect ratio to match. Fix by nesting. Oh, that's good. So I'll remove the warp stabilizer on there, right click, and nest this. And I'll call this Seawalk. And you'll see it'll change green. A nested sequence is a sequence that's been brought into a different timeline, so it's nested inside. Now when I add warp stabilizer, it's going to stabilize it. Takes a little longer, okay, for this clip. All right, and it's done. Now, I also picked this clip because I wanted to show you every single time that I'm stepping down, it's blurring, and it blurs because the shutter speed and the movement of my foot hitting and the camera jiggling, that blur is actually in the footage. What you will find sometimes that when you stabilize something, you'll see blur sometimes in the footage. You might think it's an artifact added by warp stabilizer. It isn't. It's in the footage. You don't see it as much because the footage is moving around and your brain doesn't recognize it because it's part of what we see, because we see moving footage all the time. But as soon as you stabilize it, now it sticks out. It doesn't mean that the warp stabilizer is wrong. It's just now doing something that isn't natural. So you have to pay that price. After Effects actually has a way to remove that blur. Okay. So again, this is just a beginner's look at effects. They're easy to apply, save, reapply, and adjust and change over and over again. I have countless tutorials on different ways of using effects that you can check out. All right, so next up, next up we're going to talk about color. Okay, are we ready for the next section? Hopefully you're doing okay. You've had a few breaks and you're starting to have this stuff seep into your brain. Let's talk about color, which is both fun and infuriating. It is a fun subject because we can really play with the color very easily in Premiere Pro. It can be infuriating when you're trying to balance something and it just does not work. So let's talk about balancing color and getting creative. And then also talk about scopes, because it takes years and years and years to really be able to see color correctly. And I wouldn't even put myself in that category. And one of the problems in working with color is everything is relative. So if you're looking at a clip that looks bright, if it's near a whole bunch of dark clips, it might look bright, but it's not really bright based on the overall luminance or how bright the clip is. That's why Premiere Pro has scopes, and the scopes will help you recognize where the color is and if you have any problems. I have a whole tutorial on how to read the scopes. They're very powerful. Your brain is also influenced by color around you, and a typical colorist will be in a neutral room with neutral lighting, and very few of us have that. If you've got sunlight pouring in, that's affecting you. If you've got fluorescent lights, they're green, and colored walls, lots of things. So trust the scopes. So the first place to start in Premiere Pro is the color workspace. It's an excellent place that gives you all the tools you need. Let's go have a look. Color workspace up at the top. And just like before, double click on that workspace and it's going to reset everything for you. Now, when you open up your scopes the first time, I think that's the default. You actually have 3 different scopes, and I think there are too many. Like I said, I've got a detailed description of these, but let's turn off this vector scope, turn off the waveform, and use this RGB parade. RGB, red, green, blue, parade, because there are 3 of them. And the reason they're side by side is it's easier to isolate just the green or the blue or the red. It doesn't mean the red is on the one side and the blue is on the other side. It just means they've been moved apart and they're actually squished together because they're inside a 9 by 16, a 16 by 9 panel. But it's easier to recognize them. So trust me. I also want to show you the numbers 0 to 100. Or on the right, 0 to 255, which is 256 levels. That's just 2 different ways of reading color, digital or just a 0 to 100, whatever you're used to. The top is the brightest, the bottom is the darkest, and the middle is the mid-tone. If something is below 0, it's going to be totally black. If you push more stuff down, then more of it will be black. Usually that's not a good thing. That's very specialized. If it's all up at the top, then it's going to be very bright. So it will change based on the clip. So I'm going to move my playhead, and you see the difference here. Look at that, all the way up at the top. That's this very bright sky over here as opposed to this sky, which is very medium and blue. Okay, so over on the right-hand side is the Lumetri color panel. And these are the choices that you have. Basic, creative, curves, color wheels, secondaries, vignettes. I have a whole playlist where I go deep inside. Let's concentrate on some simple things like the basic section with neutralizing this. So when I open up basic, it gives us simple tools. If you come from Adobe Lightroom, you're going to love this. This is a lot of the exact same things where it takes a setting and puts it on a slider. And the first thing you'll see is an input LUT. Don't use this. This is only for people who shoot with a specific camera and they're shooting raw or log and they need to apply a LUT. That's probably not you, probably not me. Keep going. There's a white balance selector, and that's this eyedropper here. This is an easy way to balance something. So if you see something in the clip that should be white, and it's hard to know if these buildings like that is probably off-white. Let's say that this part of the boat should be white. So I'll grab the eyedropper and click on that part of the boat, and you'll see the settings changed, and you'll see this has jumped. So now the red is lower. And if you click on the little effects, you turn this on and off. So you can see it's a cooler image and it is more neutral. Even though the red is lower, it is neutral because this was shot a little bit redder and it most likely was the time of day, but you can neutralize that. You don't have to, but the reason basic and the white balance selector is at the top is because that's the typical workflow where you will balance a clip first, then you will get creative after that fact. I'm going to reset this by clicking up here and show you what happens when I move these manually. So notice that they're moving like a teeter-totter. The green is pretty much staying the same, but blue, and when I move this to blue, the blue is moving up. When I move this to the orange, the red is moving up. I want to show you a color wheel because this is very simple color science. This is really simple. Let's go down to the color wheels and look at them. And you can see there's blues and there's that orange red. They're the opposite. So when you increase blue, you're actually decreasing that orangey red. That's the way color works. You don't have to know the science behind it. You just have to recognize that, hey, if I've got too much blue, move that slider away from the blue and you'll see the red show up. So if you were forcing this into not a neutral, but into more of a golden hour kind of look, you could do that. And then the green and the magenta are just the opposite. We go back to our color wheels. There's green and there's magenta. They're the opposite from each other. It's just easy to have these on sliders. Again, if you come from Lightroom, this is going to make a lot of sense. Next up, notice that there isn't a lot at the top, although this is a bright daylight shot. It was just shot at a darker exposure, so we could change the exposure. Don't push it too far because you're going to blow it out, but here we could push that exposure up. Go up to the top and turn this on and turn this off. You can also use things like contrast, which is pretty simple. You drag this up and you can see the contrast is increasing. Double click on any of these to reset them. Then there is highlights and whites, shadows and blacks. The highlights are near the top. The whites are right at the top. So you can push that and stretch it out. And you'll notice the scope as I'm doing that, the scope is stretching the waveform out. You're increasing the dynamic range. It's as if you shot it differently instead of shooting that range. Again, here's the shadows, and closer to the bottom is the black, so you can push that all the way to the back. Below that is saturation. Anytime you start working with the contrast and pushing the contrast, you've also increased the saturation. So if you want that, great. You could saturate it even more, or you could pull that saturation down. And I'll turn the effect off and on. Off, and we thought that that was bright before, and now you look at it, now it looks bright. That's the idea of everything being relative. And a great colorist would look at that and they would instantly know. If you asked them to draw a picture of the scopes, they'd probably get it right. That's not you and me. That's somebody who is a colorist as their job. They can recognize these things. Doesn't mean they don't use scopes. They still count on the scopes and look at that. Okay, so let's talk about creating a look. Here's our wheel guy, he's again, and then we'll apply it to different clips. And I'll show you an interesting way to do that. So this is overly green. It's very blown out. It's shot in a specific way. It's gritty. If we wanted to push this more towards the magenta, maybe not that much. Do we want to lift the blacks a bit? Maybe we'll lift the blacks or lift the shadows, but push the blacks down. And then I'll go to the creative section, and in here we've got a whole whack of different LUTs and looks. I've got a whole tutorial on this. If you Google LUTs, L-U-T, look up table is what it stands for, oh my goodness, you will find thousands of them that you can load into Premiere Pro and play with them. And you can load them easily by clicking on the drop down, clicking browse, and then finding that locally. But there's a ton of different ones in here. If you click on the right arrows, it's going to preview them before you apply them. And you can see there's a bunch here that are based on different film stocks. I want to get something that's a little bit warmer. There we go. Gold heat. Click on that. Very extreme. There's the before, there's the after. You can see it really stretches out and it gives this very stylized look. Now, these were shot with the same camera. What if I wanted to apply them here? Well, as you saw in effects, I could save a preset, I could copy paste attributes, but let's talk about using this as an adjustment layer. Back over in our, I might have to open this up a little bit. Back in our project, this little button here, I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. Click OK. It becomes selected. I'll drag it to a track above, and I'll drag it out. Right now, it's not doing anything because I haven't applied an effect. An adjustment layer, if you apply effects to the adjustment layer, it affects everything below it. So let me select that first clip. There's the effect, the Lumetri color effect, which, by the way, the color settings that you do are actually creating a Lumetri color effect. So I'm going to, instead of copy that, I'm going to cut that, and then I'll select the adjustment layer and paste that. So now that's going to be applied to all of those clips on the adjustment layer. It's great because you can easily change the one adjustment layer and it changes the look of all the effects. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is a master clip effect versus a clip effect. So I want to make this very obvious. So let's go back to our basic correction, cool this down, change the exposure, and crush the blacks, and make this less green. Okay, so we have this Lumetri effect, and you'll notice in the effects controls, there's this right-hand section and a left-hand section. This is the master clip effect. So I'm going to take this and cut it. And again, I could save a preset or copy it, but I want to remove it completely because let's imagine this clip is cut multiple times. So that would mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 effects that I have to apply to this. Or if I click here and paste this in as a master clip effect, it's now applied in every instance of this. And you can see there's a special badge down here with a red line underneath it. This is what I do for my show. So when I take this clip into Premiere Pro, I already have, because I have the same lighting, same camera and setup, I already have a preset saved and I apply it as a master preset, because then I chop it, every time I go to my talking head, it's cut, 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 cut. So master clip effects can save you tons of time. Can you change them? You can, but you have to be careful. Watch this. If you go back to the Lumetri color, you'll see the right-hand side is always selected. If you want to change it, you have to click here, then make a change, and now it's changed every one of these. If you go back to the Lumetri color panel, it will always re-select the right-hand side. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind, because if you don't, you'll forget you're doing a master clip effect change. You'll click on the Lumetri color panel. You'll change the clip effect. You'll wonder why that effect didn't change for all the other clips, because you actually added another Lumetri color effect on top of it. It's a little tricky one. So with great responsibility comes great power. You've got the power of the master clip effect, but you have to be very conscious of always editing the master and not the other one. Okay, so how are we doing? Great. Color, we could go on for days and days and days. I have a whole playlist of all the things you can do with color. But now you have a basic understanding of where the color panels are, what the scopes are, and how to change them and affect them. All right, next up, let's talk about titles and graphics. Okay, we're on to titles and graphics now, and usually this is the point where the video editing and all the rest of the stuff is done, and now we're starting to dress it up with some graphics and titles and things like that. There's a ton of titles that come directly inside Premiere Pro that you can download, either paid or free. With one caveat, Adobe just calls them MOGRTs, and so does the whole industry. Motion Graphics Templates, MOGRTs for short. The After Effects MOGRTs Some of them that are very complex can be slow. So if you did buy a bunch of these and you're wondering why they're really slow, well, it's slow because After Effects is slow. If they're made in Premiere Pro, then they're usually a lot faster. I've made a ton of titles that you can get, and I'll have links. Well, you can go to the videorevealed.com store and buy them. But I like titles that are built in Premiere Pro because they're much faster. So let's show you how we can build a simple lower third, how titles work, how we can save them, load them in. Then I'll show you where you can download a bunch of free Video Revealed titles. So up at the top in our workspace, there's a graphics workspace. I want to show you, before we click on that, here's our tools right here, specifically the text tool and the shape and pen tool. When I click on graphics, those tools will now be over here, just a little bit closer, because you can draw right directly in this window. On the right-hand side, the Essential Graphics panel opens up, and this is where you can choose, load a bunch of titles, which we'll look at in a second. This is where I've saved all of my titles. You can also jump to Adobe Stock. The Edit button is where we create them. So there's nothing here right now. You can create by using this little new item and create new text, rectangle, ellipse, or from file is a clip. And the from file can be a still image, it can be a graphic, a transparent graphic, a logo, Photoshop file, Illustrator file. It can even be a video, and it will be inside the Essential Graphics panel, and you can manipulate it there. I want to show you the simple tools underneath the pen tool. So if you click and hold, you'll see the pen tool for drawing shapes, rectangle tool, and ellipse tool. I'm just going to grab the rectangle tool and click and drag a rectangle. As soon as I drag it, on the right in the Essential Graphics, you'll see a bunch of settings that show up. I still have the rectangle tool, so if I click on anything, I'm going to be making new rectangles. So you might want to grab the selection tool, which is the move tool. And some of the settings are the alignment. For instance, if I wanted this aligned perfectly in the middle, now it's absolutely in the middle of the frame. This is great when you're creating a big title. You can also use these to align things vertically or horizontally with other objects. Right now it's going to align with nothing because I have nothing selected. It's aligning to the actual frame itself. These are the position controls. If you look to the effects controls, you'll notice a few things. First of all, there's a new setting called vector motion. Vector motion only shows up when you have an Essential Graphics title. Adobe calls these Premiere Graphics. They call them MOGRTs, Motion Graphics Templates, when they're outside of Premiere Pro, but once you import it, they'll call it Premiere Graphics. Here's where our motion settings are with position. There's the vector motion with position, and then there's the shape with position. Which one is right? Well, there is no right or wrong. It depends on how you're working with it. The position of the shape can be animated, or it can just be a position, and then you can change the overall position with vector motion. The good thing with vector motion, and I have a whole tutorial on that, is it's infinitely scalable. So you can blow things up and have text look huge, and it will never have those jagged edges on that. But let's stay over here on the right-hand side. So each one of these is going to come in on a layer, and you can change the order by dragging them up and down. There's colors down at the bottom. If you click on the fill swatch, you can pick a new color, just like any typical Adobe application. You can add a stroke onto this. You can click on the plus and add another stroke and change that color and make that larger, and that shows up like that. So lots of ways to customize this. You could put a drop shadow on here. It's very useful. And if you wanted to animate this, that's where we're going to go over to the effects controls, twirl down that shape, and now we can animate any of these properties. And if you're If you looked at if you remember the keyframes from my effects, it's the same thing. I'll set a position keyframe, move further ahead, and I can either drag these numbers or move it around here. And now it's going to move on the screen. If you go part way in between and drag that over there, now you've added 3 keyframes. So lots of ways to animate this and play around with it. So let's import a logo into this too. And remember, I could choose this and choose from file. There's also a graphics menu where you can choose new layer from file. It's the same thing. You can also drag over to the Essential Graphics panel. I'm just going to search for the logo. So there's the Photo and Travels logo. It's already imported in, remember when we started? So I can drag this into this Essential Graphics panel, and now it's another graphic that I could animate and change any way I want. And this can be any graphic that you're dropping in, and any number of different graphics, and you can have them all animate and change the stacking order. So we could put this over top of it, or we could put it below it, however you want to work, depending on the graphic that you're making, however you're doing these titles. All right, so let's create a lower third for Jonathan, and we'll have a little bit of simple animation, and then save that as our own Mogert. You'll notice down in the timeline, when I made that original shape, it created this here. What's important to notice is that it won't show up in the left-hand side. The old titler in Premiere Pro used to create Premiere titles and put them in there, but the new Premiere graphics only show up on the timeline. That's why backing these up is essential. If I've gone to all the work to create something, I'll immediately back it up in 2 places, locally and as a library. I'll show you that in a second. So let's get rid of these. And actually, let's grab the type tool and click. And I've already copied his name, so when I paste, his name shows up down at the bottom. Same as the other shape, with the addition of font information that you can have styling. But one thing that's great about type in the Essential Graphics is this button here to turn on a background. And you can change the overall opacity and the spread or the distance from the actual object. So the longer the name, the bigger the background. So this is easier than drawing a shape and then typing a name and aligning them. The background just moves with that in one object. Very nice. And you could click on the background and we could change it to any color we want. I'm going to leave it as a dark blue against the white type. So in the effects controls, I'll twirl down the text. I don't need the source text, but we're going to change the position. So the way that I like to animate is I always like to go to the second position, or the resting state of the animation. So I'll typically hit the playhead and then hit the playhead again as an estimate of how fast I want that title to move. So I just found that was good. So I'm going to click here to add a position keyframe that says that this title at this point is in this position. Next, I'll drag this back to the beginning of the title, and I could either type a number here, I could click and move it here. It's just a little bit easier. You don't want the title, you want it to move smoothly into the side. You don't want it to go. So I think it's easier to drag the position X coordinate to the left. And if you add the shift key to that, you'll drag it quicker. So I'll put that out, and this is how it goes. Boop,
South Africa,
pops out on
or
the screen.
Canada. And
I'm just going to move this up to V3 so it doesn't bump into anything else. Move it over here.
To move to a different country,
comes out on the
our
screen.
choices were New Zealand,
and right now it's just
South
sitting
Africa,
there, and when it
or
ends, it
Canada.
disappears. I'm going to extend this amount. What I wanted to do is to hold for a while and then back out. I want to show you a typical error that it happens in animation where you think it will do one thing and it'll do the other thing. It's a real simple fix. Okay, so let's look here. So it starts on the left,
To move to a different country,
pops
our
over to
choices
the
were
right.
New Zealand, South Africa,